I'm not normally a fan of Tom Cruise, but there is one movie, and I think it's his best movie, where he captures something essential about capitalism, how our economy works. Show me the money. I'm not going to shout because I don't want to wreck your ears, but show me the money is that moment in the movie where you start to understand what really matters. It's the money that's being spent. It's the moment when the money is spent. How much money? Who's doing the spending? Do you really believe it's real? And do you see the so-called whites of the eyes of capitalism, the money moment? That's why in trying to understand the economy, I always look at retail sales figures most closely because they are the show me the money moment of our economy. It's the moment when someone has enough confidence about their future, enough income, enough ability to say, if I spend this money now, I'm confident there will be other money that comes in and I won't go broke right now. Or I've actually got the money because I have some savings and buying this isn't going to wreck me and I actually need this thing or I quite like this thing. So the animal spirits of the economy are often expressed in how we spend our money. Are we buying cars? Are we buying fridges? Are we going out for dinner to a really fancy restaurant? Or are we just going to a really cheap takeaways? Are we buying our alcohol in bulk from the supermarket? Or are we getting the expensive bottles from the bottle store? These are the questions which tell you a little bit more about how the economy is travelling. The show me the money moment of retail. And this week on When the Facts Change, we talk with Mary Jo Vergara, a senior economist at Kiwibank, who's got some great data on how we spent our money over the Christmas New Year break. And it's an important period. There's a lot of show me the money moments in summer when you're on holiday. You feel spendier, you're with your friends and your family, you're feeling relaxed, you think, gee, I have got a pay packet there, maybe I got a bonus. And when I go back to work, I'm feeling good about things. It's a sunny day, I'll spend. So watching how people spend during the summer is important. And by now, people should be starting to spend up again. Remember, we've had a recession for a couple of years, really, and people have been talking about green shoots for quite some time. There should have been quite a few green shoots over the summer. Remember, we had rate cuts from August onwards, and there were actually some tax cuts for some people in the middle of the year. And yet, it hasn't really felt like the show me the money moment was really loud and really insistent. This week, Mary Jo Vergara talks about a summer of cautious indulgence. Yes, we did spend a tiny bit more, but not an awful lot, and not on the expensive things, and not on the big trips. It was a summer when we're still a little bit cautious about what's going to happen next. We survived until 2025, but we're not actually going out there and having a big celebration yet. In theory, we should be doing slightly more. Those green shoots should be slightly higher through 2025. We'll see as interest rates are cut and people expect maybe house prices to rise and they'll feel richer. But in this episode of When the Facts Change, you'll get a sense too of how not everyone's the same. If you're a renter, you're doing it tougher than if you're a homeowner. Even though homeowners have had to pay higher interest rates, in many cases they can handle it. Their actual costs of owning their home through their interest costs and other costs are actually significantly lower than for most people who rent. And rents have been rising quickly. And it's interesting to see how the different types, the different classes in New Zealand have been spending their money. That's this week on When the Facts Change. Well, kia ora, and welcome back to the Spin-Off Studios to Mary Jo Vergara, an economist at Kiwibank. Great to see you again here on When the Facts Change.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Talking spending, round two.
Yeah, you've been hard at it with your spreadsheets and no doubt some interesting analysis of the numbers that Kiwibank gets from its credit card data. So this is all anonymised. You don't know exactly how I spent my money, but you've got a general idea of what people with Kiwibank cards spent their money on. Could you tell us what you found for December and January of this year compared with a year ago? Because that'll give us a flavour of how we did, because things were supposed to be better than last year.
Yeah, well, I guess the title for this report is A Summer of Cautious Indulgence, which is a funny phrase. But I guess, summer, it's a time when we're out and about, catching up with friends and family. But this time around, we saw less kind of going out to, I guess, restaurants and bars and that sort of high-end fine dining kind of scene, but a lot into the more affordable luxuries like coffees, maybe getting an extra scone or something. That was the kind of theme of the summer where people were still kind of holding back in terms of their spending.
So it's more sort of fish and chips rather than...
it is fish and chip season, yeah.
rather than some sort of sit-down meal with a couple of courses.
Yeah, it seems to be that way. They're just kind of, holding their purse strings kind of tightly still. We have had a few rate cuts, but maybe households are, rebuilding their savings, waiting for more rate cuts to come. But for now, over that summer period, is a lot weaker than previous years.
Because over December, January, you're right, we do tend to lose our inhibitions. We're out there with friends and family. We're having fun. The sun is shining. Maybe you've gone for a trip. It's amazing how spendy you are when you walk into an airport or you go to a holiday destination with lots of nice shops. What sort of things weren't we spending our money on this time around?
It was, if we're talking food and hospitality, again, it's at restaurants and bars kind of scene, sticking to the cafes and the smaller kind of shops there. We were also spending a lot more on fruit and veggies. I think we just kind of took advantage of the weaker produce prices over that summer period. So the volume of spend actually outstripped value there, which I guess is a good news. You got to balance your fish and chips with some healthy meals. But that was kind of one interesting space as well.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the January volumes, so this isn't about how much you spent, but how many crates or boxes that you bought, to give people a sense of, how much stuff. And interestingly, alcohol down more than 5% in January from a year ago. What's going on there?
I'm not really too sure. I think that was kind of a surprise as well to see that alcohol had fallen. Again, volume of transactions is a really good measure because it kind of gives you, I suppose, a more pure measure of demand. It's not, take into account of price effects if you're looking at the value of spend. So the volume of spend there suggests that we didn't have as much demand for alcohol as last year.
And does that actually take into account the non-alcoholic drinks that people are buying?
I think it does because it's looking at spend at alcohol stores, so Liquorland and all those things. So yeah, it does take that into account.
And the highest category of growth in volumes, butchers, nearly 10% in January from a year ago. What's going on there?
I think it's at summer period. It's a time for barbecues and get-togethers, and you got to have your meat, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe there's not quite so much vegan action going on. I'm also curious about spending on travel because prices for air tickets were a bit down in the last year. We obviously haven't had quite so many international tourists coming through, particularly from far away. So there's been a few more hotel rooms available. What's happening with retail spending on travel through the summer versus a year ago?
Yeah, looking at flight bookings and hotels and accommodation spend for those areas, they were down on last year's levels, which was a bit of a surprise because looking at the trend for the past few years, it's always been increasing in the summer. But this time around, it seems that we kind of stayed local. And again, this is looking at any flight booking either domestically or overseas. So it seems like we stayed put this summer. It could be a correction after the COVID period because we had a lot of pent-up demand over the last 5 years to go around and explore. But maybe this fall that we've seen over the summer is just a correction from that.
Yeah, and then just looking at the changes over the last 4 or 5 years, both in the value and the volume of spend, what struck me in particular is how through 2023 and 2024, there's only been a few months here and there where the number has been positive, i.e. both the value and the volume has mostly for the last 2 years been negative, i.e. falling, which is really unusual. And means in per capita terms, after adjusting for inflation, I've seen measures that retail spending on what you regularly call shops is down at like a decade ago levels.
Yeah, it's particularly stark in that durables kind of core retail space where value and volumes of spending is down. We've seen a lot of discounting among durable goods. So those are your sort of household furniture kind of things, sport equipment. Those things have seen a lot of discounting because import inflation has really come off. But that has not been able to lure any demand toward it. Again, it could be the fact that we spent up a lot during COVID on precisely those items, but we don't need them anymore, so we're redirecting our spending elsewhere.
I walked into a sporting goods store over summer because I'm an old man and I like to relive my youth of being a cricketer.
Very nice.
Picked up a cricket bat and looked at the price, $1,200, and I almost choked and ran out of the store. The bill shock was something else. I'm also curious to see what's happening with spending for housing-related goods, you know, the drapes and the curtains and the home electronics. What's going on over Christmas there?
Yeah, that was an interesting, it kind of broke away from the trend. So in aggregate, core retail was down over comparing to last summer, but there were some pockets where, you know, there might be some bright spots emerging there, and household related spending was one of them. You saw things like home electronics kind of ticking up. It had been in a consistent decline over 2024, but those kind of areas saw a bit of demand over that period. Again, this is a volume, so maybe people are kind of looking around again, maybe hopeful that maybe the housing market picks up this year, and then they kind of are thinking about the value of their own home, you know, buying new furniture and all the rest of it. So there are some signs, I guess, positive signs within that space.
Yeah, just stepping back a bit, thinking about how we were all feeling at the end of the year, going into summer and into the new year. There's been a lot of talk of green shoots for a while now. And for a year we were thinking, oh, well, it's going to come up. We've had the tough times, you know, there's a new government in, interest rates have been slashed, 125 basis points. You know, unemployment's still relatively low compared to, you know, previous recessions. In 2008-9, unemployment got well over 5%. In 1991 too, it got to 11%. So for a lot of people, they still have a job. They may not have the second or third job or the extra hours they want, but they still have a job. It's sort of surprising to me that we haven't seen more of a recovery and a rebound. It seems to be this period of restraint and constraint, this period of caution and your cautious indulgence seems to have been a lot more cautious than indulgent.
Yeah. The question is, when will that outlook actually materialize, right? And I think it still is our outlook that things will improve from the second half of this year. It's just that lagged effect, really, of rate cuts coming through, but it doesn't hit pockets immediately. Or when it does hit their pocket, they're wanting to rebuild their savings or bringing their balance sheets back into balance first before they actually start to spend up again. So maybe it's just about bringing those balance sheets back into baseline before they do that. But again, it's that lagged effect. The unemployment rate is at 5.1, which is a 4-year high, and there is we expect it to run a little bit higher from here as well, which is not as high as previous recessions, as you say, but to move from 3.2 at the low is quite a big move.
Just thinking about the lags of the economy and how sometimes they can turn into feedback loops, because the hope is, of course, that when you cut interest rates, you can see the economy pick up again in 12 to 18 months. But often you see unemployment pick up and the number of jobs fall within that 12 to 18 month period. One of the risks, I suppose, is that the jobs recession carries on for a bit longer and starts to influence how people are thinking about spending. Even though they've got the cash because they're not paying so much in their interest costs, they're actually holding on to it. It becomes a negative feedback loop if we see the jobs recession go on for longer. How much of a risk is that?
Yeah, I think that's a big risk, that job security. It's part of the reason, if we think back during COVID, part of the reason why we saw such a big spending over that time, not only because interest rates were low, but also because jobs were really secure. We had very low unemployment during that time, so people felt confident to continue spending. But now we're seeing the reverse, where job insecurity is a bit more up in the air. So that could be weighing on their spending behavior as well. They may not lose their jobs, but seeing the kind of environment that they're in, maybe people they know are losing their own jobs. So it does weigh on consumer spending.
And you mentioned household balance sheets earlier as something to think about, because it's not just money in, money out. People have cushions. People have assets that they can sell, or at least assets they can point their bank to and say, look, give me a bit more because I've got this over here. How are balance sheets for households at the moment? And, how much is that playing into retail spending?
Yeah, I think if we're talking broadly, household balance sheets are pretty stretched given high interest rates, and we've had inflation high as well for the last 2 years. Obviously, it's come off now, but broadly speaking, household balance sheets are stretched. But if you're looking at pockets, there's obviously a divergence there. Some are obviously doing it a lot tougher than other pockets in the society.
Yeah, because when you think about the difference between pockets, I suppose you could call it, parts of the household sector, you've got renters and then you've got homeowners. You can basically, if you wanted to take a class analysis to New Zealand, that is it. Homeowners and renters. Renters have seen their rents rise at least as fast as their incomes in the last wee while. Rent inflation has come off the boil a bit, but it's still there. And of course, many of those people who are renting have had the most pressure on their incomes because they may have lost a second or third job, or they're not getting the hours that they need. And it's interesting to see the Salvation Army's State of the Nation report document quite an increase in the number of people, obviously renters, who need help with food and with others. Do you think there's a difference there in those household balance sheets and how that's playing out for spending?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a younger demographic that are hurting the most, I think, at the moment, because if we're talking about the labour market, 33,000 jobs were lost in 2024, and 70% of that was accounted for were people aged between 15 and 24. So really they are concentrated in terms of the job losses, and that's going to have an impact on them. Again, the renting population, you'd say, is majority being the younger demographic again. So it is a disproportionate, inflation's been disproportionately impacting the younger demographic.
And there is, we always like to look at the exceptions to the rule. There are a group of people who own their own homes outright. So there's no mortgage at all. So they haven't actually had increased costs from interest rates. By then, often, if you're a bit older, you've been able to put some money aside from late in your career, you've got term deposits. So you've got no mortgage, and then you've got a higher interest rate on your term deposit, so higher returns on your term deposit. And those people actually, just quietly, the last 2 or 3 years have been pretty good.
Yeah, again, it's that disproportionate thing. If you're looking at household living cost index, which takes into account interest repayments, you do see that those in that kind of threshold haven't been hurting from inflation or the rise in interest rates as much. Inflation it hurts people differently, and those on fixed incomes or low incomes, obviously more of their income goes towards food and fuel, those necessities, and they don't have as much wiggle room as other, groups in society.
So 2024 was really about survive till 2025, and maybe things will be picking up, and the green shoots that we talked about in the second half, they'll be bursting forth in 2025. What's it look like out there at the moment, now that we've gone through that unusual Christmas, summer holidays period, and now we're buckling down? What's 2025 feeling like?
I think right now, at this moment, it's still quite mixed. I think, and that's indicative, I suppose, of a turning point, that some are up, some are down. Our outlook is still the same, where the second half of the year things should improve. That includes consumer spending, that includes business investment, and economic growth in general should pick up going into next year. Again, it's that lagged effect of monetary policy. It takes a long time for it to actually feed through the economy. This cycle, though, should be shorter because because the mortgage book is really shortened up. So rate cuts, households are feeling them, at least if you're on a mortgage, you're feeling these rate cuts much earlier than, say, previous rate cycles. So this turnaround in activity should happen this year, and hopefully when we have this conversation next year, that outlook has materialized.
I'll hold you to that because there are some factors that will start to flow through. Obviously, interest rates. This episode is going out a few days before. We're expecting a 50 basis point rate cut from the Reserve Bank. And also we're starting to see some real income growth. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, we've been in a cost of living crisis, which we define as a period where consumer price inflation is running above wage growth. We're now seeing the reverse, where consumer price inflation is below wage growth. So that should show that real incomes are starting to grow. So we're entering that period. It won't feel like it immediately. Again, it's been quite mixed, but that should be a tailwind for consumer spending this year.
And then on the balance sheet side, house prices are expected to rise. How important do you think that'll be for the retail sector, for the general health of the economy as we head into late 2025?
Yeah, I think it'd be quite important. We know that over 2/3 of households' wealth is tied to the housing market. So an expected improvement in the housing market should help with consumption. That wealth effect should kick in and help consumption lift this year. And we are expecting house prices to grow this year at around 6%, which isn't it's not exactly shooting lights out, but it is better than previous years.
And then finally, I wonder how retailers and small businesses are feeling about the year, because they've been holding on for quite some time for the surge in spending to come. And there's been a lot of some population growth over the last couple of years, which might have helped. How do you think those small businesses and retailers are coping and will cope through the rest of the year?
I think if they've been able to survive until this year, then that's really good. I think we're at this turning point, so things should just be getting better. Hopefully this report that we wrote of a summer of pretty weak spending will be the last, and hopefully the next reports we look at, when we look at the spending data again, it should see those improvements in the space of retail especially. Hopefully we do see households back out and spending again.
So, the summer of cautious indulgence. Mary Jo Vergara, senior economist at Kiwibank, thank you very much for coming in. And this time next year, maybe we'll be talking about a summer of indulgence.
Hopefully. Thank you.